Have you ever wondered what it really takes to achieve success in the harshest of circumstances? Is it honesty? Or could it be something else, something a little more unexpected, even controversial? Today, we're diving deep into the world of power, strategy, and the mind of one of history's most misunderstood figures, Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli is often mischaracterized as advocating for deceit and ruthless manipulation, but if you look beyond the surface, you'll find a far more complex and insightful figure. In this video, we're going to explore some of Machiavelli's most intriguing lessons and how they continue to shape the strategies of the world's most powerful people, from political leaders to business magnates and even social media influencers. But here's the twist. What if everything you've been told about honesty and integrity and leadership is actually holding you back? What if, just sometimes, the ends really do justify the means? In a world where perception often trumps reality, Machiavelli teaches us that power isn't just about what we do, it's about how we're seen doing it. That means deception, when strategically used, can be a tool for the greater good. You might find it uncomfortable, but these are lessons that could change the way you approach leadership, personal growth, and even your day-to-day interactions. But before we dive into the core of Machiavelli's powerful insights, I want to remind you to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. Trust me, you don't want to miss out on any of our deep dives into fascinating topics like this. And if you truly appreciate the content and want to support the channel, feel free to send a super thanks. Your generosity helps us keep producing this kind of thought-provoking content. So, are you ready to learn the truth about power, perception, and the Machiavellian Paradox? Stay tuned as we uncover how strategic deception might just be the key to achieving the goals you've been striving for. Machiavelli's work, The Prince, introduced one of his most controversial and provocative ideas. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. This idea directly challenges many of the leadership principles promoted in modern times, such as empathy, emotional intelligence, and building connections based on trust and respect. In today's world, we are constantly told that leaders should be warm, approachable, and authentic in their relationships, whether in business, politics, or personal lives. We are told that honesty and transparency build the foundation of strong leadership. However, Machiavelli's view flips this notion on its head. He argued that men by nature are selfish, fickle, and unreliable. When faced with a choice between their own advantage and loyalty to someone else, they will almost always choose their own benefit. For Machiavelli, excessive honesty is not a virtue. It is a liability. This is a hard pill to swallow for those who embrace the modern ideal that transparency and truth will always be rewarded. But the reality, as Machiavelli understood it, is that truth can make one vulnerable, and honesty can get you exploited. His viewpoint is grounded in the harsh realities of human nature, where trust is often broken, and promises are frequently ignored. Let's consider this idea in the context of business. Imagine you're negotiating a deal with another company. You go into the meeting with the full intention of being transparent, laying out every aspect of your company's capabilities, challenges, and weaknesses. You believe that by being honest, the other party will respect you more and perhaps be more inclined to work with you. However, after the meeting, the other company takes advantage of your transparency, using the information you shared to secure a better deal for themselves. Instead of building a stronger partnership, you have inadvertently given away critical information that weakens your position. In contrast, if you had approached the negotiation with a sense of strategic opacity, choosing not to reveal everything, you may have been able to navigate the discussion more effectively. By keeping certain details close to the chest, you preserve your bargaining power and force the other party to make the first move. This, according to Machiavelli, is a more effective strategy because you control the flow of information and avoid surrendering your position prematurely. Machiavelli's assertion that it is better to be feared than loved stems from his understanding of human nature and the unpredictability of others. People, according to him, are inherently self-interested. They will break their promises when it is convenient for them, and their loyalty is often tied to their own survival or success. This is particularly relevant in situations where power dynamics are at play, such as in politics or high-stakes business environments. Consider the world of corporate leadership. Imagine a CEO who is known for being kind, approachable, and deeply invested in the well-being of their employees. While this may earn them a certain amount of admiration, it doesn't necessarily protect them from betrayal or challenges to their authority. If an employee or competitor believes that the CEO is too soft or too emotionally invested in maintaining relationships, they might exploit that vulnerability for personal gain. In contrast, a CEO who commands respect through strength and a certain level of fear can often maintain a more stable and compliant workforce. This is not to suggest that leaders should rule with an iron fist, but that a certain level of fear can create a structure where employees recognize the consequences of crossing boundaries. Machiavelli's philosophy encourages leaders to understand that their role is not to make everyone like them, but to ensure that they maintain control over their power and authority. Fear, in this context, is not about causing physical harm or cruelty. Rather, it is about ensuring that people understand the weight of their actions and the consequences that will follow if they challenge the leader. This is what Machiavelli meant when he said that it is better to be feared than loved. Fear compels respect and ensures that people will be more cautious in their dealings with you. In the realm of politics, Machiavelli's ideas are perhaps most relevant. Politicians, much like business leaders, must navigate complex relationships and power struggles. The public, Machiavelli argued, often responds more to the appearance of strength and decisiveness than to the actual qualities of a leader. Politicians who present themselves as strong and unyielding, even if they're not fully honest or transparent, are often more successful than those who are purely idealistic and open. The appearance of confidence and control can be more important than the actual truth of the situation. Take, for example, the world of political campaigning. During an election, politicians often find themselves facing difficult choices about what to reveal and what to withhold. A politician who is entirely transparent about their position, including all the challenges and limitations they face, may appear weak or indecisive. On the other hand, a politician who carefully crafts a narrative, focusing on their strengths and downplaying their weaknesses, may be seen as a stronger, more competent leader, even if the narrative they present isn't entirely truthful. This is a common tactic in political campaigns, where spin and messaging can significantly influence the outcome of an election. The public doesn't always vote based on facts. They vote based on the stories that resonate with their hopes, fears, and desires. In this sense, Machiavelli's advice holds true. People vote for the story they want to believe, not necessarily the reality of the candidate's capabilities. Machiavelli's view challenges the moral absolutism that many of us hold dear. He asks us to question whether our commitment to absolute honesty might actually be holding us back from achieving our goals. He argues that the most successful people in history, those we admire and study, often understood the importance of strategic deception. They knew that revealing everything wasn't always wise, and that sometimes, in order to win, they needed to hide their true intentions. It's important to note that Machiavelli is not advocating for outright dishonesty or manipulation for its own sake. Rather, he is suggesting that we should be strategic in the way we present ourselves and manage our relationships. In certain situations, withholding information or presenting a carefully crafted narrative can be the key to achieving success. The key to Machiavelli's philosophy is the recognition that power dynamics are constantly at play, and to navigate them effectively, one must understand when to be transparent and when to be strategic. This is especially important in leadership. Effective leaders know when to show vulnerability and when to maintain an air of strength. They understand that their public persona must align with the expectations of those they lead, and they use this understanding to create an environment of respect and control, whether in politics, business, or social relationships. The ability to manage one's image and control the narrative can be the difference between success and failure. In conclusion, Machiavelli's view on honesty and deception offers a challenging but valuable perspective. His idea that it is better to be feared than loved suggests that transparency and excessive honesty may not always serve us well in high-stakes situations. Instead, strategic deception, whether in the form of withholding information, controlling the narrative, or projecting strength, can often lead to better outcomes. Machiavelli's insights remind us that success is not always about being liked. It's about knowing when to reveal your cards and when to keep them close. In a world where power dynamics are constantly at play, understanding the role of deception and fear can be the key to winning, not just in business or politics, but in life. Machiavelli's philosophy on deception often makes people uncomfortable because it challenges the very core of what many consider virtuous behavior honesty. Yet, whether you realize it or not, Machiavelli's idea of strategic deception is something that we already engage in on a daily basis. Think about a simple social situation. Have you ever told someone that their haircut looked good when deep down you didn't think it did? Or perhaps you've exaggerated your enthusiasm for a friend's creative project, even if you weren't that impressed. These small, seemingly innocent acts of deception are often used to avoid conflict or maintain the peace in relationships, which is what Machiavelli refers to as defensive deception. Now, while we typically use these small lies to prevent tension, Machiavelli didn't advocate for deception just as a way to smooth over uncomfortable social situations. He viewed these forms of deception as strategic tools for achieving personal or professional goals. In his view, the purpose of deception was not to deceive for the sake of being deceptive, but to strategically position oneself for success, whether that's in gaining influence, securing a job, or advancing in any other area where power dynamics are at play. Essentially, Machiavelli believed that in a world full of power struggles, being too honest could leave you at a disadvantage, vulnerable to being exploited or undermined. In his masterwork, The Prince, Machiavelli compares leaders to two animals, the fox and the lion. The fox, he argues, is cunning, shrewd, and strategic. It represents the cleverness and the ability to outwit one's opponents. The lion, on the other hand, is strong and intimidating, symbolizing power, force, and the ability to strike fear into others. According to Machiavelli, a successful leader must embody both of these qualities. The fox represents the need for intelligence and planning. The lion represents the need for strength and the ability to enforce one's will. Take a moment to consider two types of leaders. One leader may rely on force alone, an authoritarian figure who demands respect through sheer power. While this approach may work in some cases, it's limited in its effectiveness. Fear alone can only get you so far before it leads to rebellion or resentment. In contrast, a leader who acts solely as the fox, someone who relies on strategy and manipulation without demonstrating any power, can be easily overlooked or dismissed. People may follow them temporarily, but without the threat of real consequences, their authority can be undermined. That's why Machiavelli argues that the most effective leaders combine both traits, using strategic deception when needed while also maintaining the strength to command respect. This duality in leadership is perfectly illustrated in history by figures like Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was a master strategist, employing deception in warfare and political maneuvering. He famously used misdirection to deceive his enemies about his intentions, feigning weaknesses to lure them into traps. One of his most famous military strategies during the 1805 Ulm campaign involved tricking the Austrians into thinking he was retreating, only to turn around and decisively defeat them when they pursued him. This is an example of the fox in action, Napoleon outwitting his opponents by creating a false narrative about his movements. But he also demonstrated the lion's strength when needed. For instance, when he returned from exile on the island of Elba, he quickly regained control of France, not through subterfuge, but by projecting overwhelming strength and power, forcing his opponents to accept his return. Napoleon knew when to play the fox and when to play the lion, and this made him one of the most successful and feared leaders in history. However, this balance between cunning and strength isn't just a historical lesson, it applies to the modern world as well. In our everyday lives, we often use strategic deception in ways that benefit us. Take the business world, for instance. Imagine you're negotiating a deal, and your company has certain weaknesses or limitations that would reduce your negotiating power if the other party were to know about them. In this situation, revealing everything would be foolish and potentially disastrous for the deal. Instead, you might choose to downplay your weaknesses or redirect the conversation to focus on your strengths. This is Machiavelli's fox in action. You're using deception not to harm anyone, but to position yourself in a way that helps you achieve your goals. If you were to lay all your cards on the table, your opponent would have the upper hand, exploiting the information you've given them. Similarly, in social interactions, the same principle applies. You may sometimes downplay your own difficulties or exaggerate your excitement about something in order to fit in or to maintain a positive image. This is not necessarily malicious, but a way of managing your image and social capital. People do this every day in interactions with friends, family, and even in professional settings. Think about the last time you went for a job interview. You weren't going to highlight every one of your weaknesses right out of the gate. Instead, you focus on your strengths, downplaying or strategically hiding any potential shortcomings. This is a form of strategic self-presentation, where you use the same principles Machiavelli suggested strategic deception to put yourself in the best light. The reason this approach works is simple. Humans are naturally inclined to view the world through narratives. Our social relationships, political interactions, and business dealings are often shaped more by the stories we tell than by the raw truth. This is why the fox strategic deception plays such a critical role in how people achieve success. Deception, in this context, is not about dishonesty for the sake of harming others, but about crafting a more favorable narrative for yourself that aligns with your personal or professional objectives. While Machiavelli's advice on deception can sound harsh, it's important to remember that he did not advocate for dishonesty for its own sake. He wasn't saying that you should lie at every opportunity, nor did he suggest that you should manipulate others purely for personal gain. Rather, his philosophy suggests that deception, when used strategically, is a tool that can help you accomplish your goals. Just as the fox uses cunning to navigate through traps, a leader or individual can use strategic deception to navigate the complexities of power dynamics and achieve the outcomes they desire. There are numerous examples in modern business and politics where leaders have used Machiavellian principles of strategic deception to get ahead. One such example is Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. Jobs was often described as a master of what many referred to as his reality distortion field. He was able to convince others, whether employees, investors, or customers, that the impossible was possible. His ability to present a vision of the future that seemed both innovative and achievable, even when the technology didn't fully support it, is a perfect example of Machiavellian deception. Jobs wasn't necessarily being dishonest, but he was certainly strategic about the narrative he created around Apple's products and vision. His ability to shape the perception of reality allowed him to lead Apple to great heights. He was the fox, weaving a narrative that made his vision irresistible. Yet at times, Jobs also embodied the lion. For example, when Apple was struggling in the late 1990s, Jobs returned to the company and made bold decisions, such as cutting entire product lines and focusing the company's resources on a few key innovations. These decisions were not subtle. They were forceful and displayed the kind of leadership that demanded respect and obedience. Jobs knew when to push forward with strength and when to step back and let the strategy unfold. Machiavelli's point is not that we should always manipulate the truth for personal gain, but that the world is full of power dynamics where the smart use of deception can level the playing field. The key to strategic deception is understanding when to deploy it and how to balance it with genuine strength, as embodied by the lion. The fox and the lion are not opposing forces, but complementary elements that can help a leader succeed. Without the fox's cunning, the lion's power would be blind, and without the lion's strength, the fox would be vulnerable to being overpowered. In conclusion, the principle of strategic deception that Machiavelli advocates is something that we already use in our daily lives, often unconsciously. From telling small lies to protect relationships, to using more calculated deceptions to navigate business negotiations. We are all familiar with the concept of hiding certain truths to preserve our interests. What Machiavelli urges us to do is to recognize the power of this tool and use it strategically, much like the fox and the lion combining the cleverness of the fox with the strength of the lion. Only then can we truly master the art of achieving our goals in a world full of complex power dynamics. Machiavelli's insights into the importance of appearance over reality are some of his most profound and controversial teachings. He argued that everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. In other words, the way you present yourself to the world, whether in politics, business, or social relationships, matters far more than your true nature or intentions. This perspective contradicts much of the modern emphasis on authenticity and being true to oneself, values that have become ingrained in today's social media-driven world. However, Machiavelli's understanding of human nature suggests that how others perceive you is often more influential than the reality of who you are. At the heart of this argument is the idea that human beings are driven by perception, not by fact. People make judgments based on what they can see, hear, and experience on the surface. They judge you by the stories you tell and the image you project, not by the complexities or the nuances of your actual character. Machiavelli, understanding this about human nature, suggested that leaders and anyone in a position of power must cultivate an image that aligns with what they want others to believe about them. The focus should be on crafting the right narrative and appearance, rather than on being completely transparent or genuine, which can often backfire in a competitive environment. A historical figure who exemplifies this idea is Julius Caesar. While consolidating power in ancient Rome, Caesar was a master of shaping his public persona. Despite his private ambitions to overthrow the Roman Republic and establish himself as the absolute ruler, he maintained the public appearance of respecting Roman traditions and the Republic's values. He understood that the people needed to believe that the Republic was intact, even as he was subtly dismantling it from the inside. By maintaining the facade of Republican values, refusing the crown when offered, for example, he reassured the public and the elite that he was not a threat to the system, even as he quietly accumulated more power. In reality, Caesar was positioning himself to become the dictator of Rome, but through his strategic manipulation of his public image, he was able to avoid backlash for much of his career. Machiavelli understood that this manipulation of appearances wasn't just a political tactic, it was a crucial element of leadership and power. In The Prince, he stresses the importance of leaders maintaining a certain image, even if that image is not entirely reflective of their true character or intentions. This is especially true when a leader is transitioning from one form of government to another, as Caesar did, or when a leader is trying to navigate a delicate political environment. The appearance of virtue, strength, and commitment to the greater good can be just as important, if not more important, than actual virtue itself. In today's world, we see this principle in action across various fields. Politicians, influencers, and corporations all engage in what could be termed as strategic deception to present an image that aligns with their objectives. Social media influencers, for example, curate an idealized version of their lives, showcasing their success, beauty, and happiness. However, these images often conceal the personal struggles, insecurities, and hardships that many of these influencers face behind the scenes. While some may argue that this is a form of dishonesty, Machiavelli would argue that this is simply a strategic use of appearance to craft a narrative that resonates with people's desires and expectations. The most successful influencers are those who are able to consistently project an image that their audience aspires to. Whether it's the carefully staged photos on Instagram, the seemingly effortless fashion choices, or the curated, perfect family moments, these influencers are creating a story that their followers want to believe. The narrative they present is one of success, happiness, and an enviable lifestyle. Meanwhile, the reality, often filled with insecurities, challenges, and failures, is hidden from view. This strategic manipulation of reality, according to Machiavelli, is not only acceptable, but necessary for achieving success in a world that is driven by perception rather than truth. Similarly, politicians frequently rely on carefully crafted images to gain and maintain power. In an election, candidates are often judged based on their public persona rather than their actual record or true intentions. Voters do not always have the time or resources to dig into the details of a candidate's platform or past decisions. Instead, they rely on the image a candidate projects, whether that's an image of strength, empathy, or alignment with their values. A candidate who can present themselves as a strong, decisive leader, even if their actions are not always consistent with that image, is often more successful than one who is fully transparent about their limitations or inconsistencies. Take, for example, political campaigns in the United States. During a presidential election, candidates are often judged not by their true stances on policy issues, but by how they craft their narrative. One of the most powerful tools they use is messaging, the ability to communicate their values, their vision, and their leadership qualities through speeches, advertisements, and social media platforms can make or break a campaign. Even when candidates' actual positions are more complex or nuanced, they focus on projecting a simplified version of themselves that resonates with voters. In this sense, Machiavelli's teachings are still highly relevant in the modern world of politics. In the corporate world, the importance of appearance is just as critical. Companies spend millions of dollars crafting their public image through branding, marketing, and public relations. Apple, for example, has built a brand around simplicity, elegance, and innovation. While these qualities are embedded in the company's products, they are also carefully curated through marketing campaigns and product launches. Apple's advertisements often focus on how the products look and feel, rather than delving into the more complex aspects of their production or the challenges the company faces. The public perceives Apple as a cutting-edge, forward-thinking company, and this perception helps drive demand for its products, even if the reality is much more complex. Companies also use strategic deception in times of crisis. When a company faces a scandal, for instance, its public relations team will quickly spring into action, focusing on repairing its image. They may downplay the severity of the issue, shift the blame to external factors, or offer a narrative that portrays the company as taking swift action to resolve the problem. The reality of the situation might be far more complicated, but the appearance of control and responsibility is what matters to the public. In many cases, a company's ability to control its image and maintain a favorable public perception is more important than the actual facts surrounding the crisis. Machiavelli's emphasis on the importance of appearance over reality is not just about manipulation for manipulation's sake. Rather, it's about recognizing the power of perception and using it to your advantage. By controlling the narrative and crafting a public image that aligns with your goals, you can gain the trust, loyalty, and support of others, even if the reality is more complicated. In a world where people often judge others based on what they see and hear on the surface, the ability to manage your appearance is a crucial skill. In essence, Machiavelli's teaching about the importance of appearances is a call for strategic self-presentation. While modern values of authenticity and transparency are important, Machiavelli's message remains relevant in today's world of image-driven media and power dynamics. Whether you're a politician, an influencer, a business leader, or just someone trying to succeed in life, understanding the power of perception and how to shape it to your advantage can make all the difference in achieving your goals. By emphasizing the importance of how others perceive you, Machiavelli's work challenges us to think critically about the role of authenticity and transparency in achieving success. It's not about being dishonest for the sake of deception, but about understanding the reality of power dynamics and using appearances to navigate them effectively. This is a lesson that has stood the test of time, one that continues to influence leaders, strategists, and thinkers across various fields today. The phrase, "the ends justify the means," is often misunderstood, primarily due to the way it has been taken out of context and used to justify unethical behavior. Many people attribute this saying directly to Machiavelli, interpreting it as a blanket endorsement of unscrupulous actions to achieve success. However, this interpretation fails to capture the depth of Machiavelli's thinking on matter. In fact, what Machiavelli actually suggested was that in situations where the outcomes are of paramount importance, results often outweigh the methods used to achieve them. It is not a carte blanche approval of a moral behavior, but a strategic perspective on how power should be applied when the stakes are high. Machiavelli understood that power, by its very nature, is about outcomes. Leaders are judged by their success, and their success often hinges on achieving their goals, regardless of the methods used to get there. This is evident in many historical actions, one of the most notable being Abraham Lincoln's decision to suspend habeas corpus during the Civil War in order to preserve the Union. On the surface, Lincoln's actions were a clear overreach of presidential power, as he violated the constitutional rights of American citizens. Yet, in the context of a civil war that threatened the very survival of the nation, Lincoln's decision to take such an extreme step was, from a Machiavellian perspective, justified. The suspension of habeas corpus allowed him to prevent any potential threats to the Union's stability, which ultimately helped preserve the country during one of its darkest times. This example illustrates what Machiavelli meant when he said that the ends justify the means. While Lincoln's action was controversial and, in some ways, a breach of the law, the goal of saving the Union was so important that it warranted extraordinary measures. This is not to say that unethical behavior should always be condoned, but rather that in the context of high-stakes situations, difficult decisions sometimes require bending or breaking the conventional moral rules. This concept underscores the idea that the application of power should be strategic, carefully considered, and focused on the long-term goals rather than a rigid adherence to moral rules in the short term. In understanding Machiavelli's view on the ends justifying the means, it is important to differentiate between what might be considered necessary actions and what might be deemed as purely self-serving or opportunistic. Machiavelli was not advocating for unbridled manipulation, deceit, or cruelty simply for the sake of power. Instead, he recognized that in situations where the survival or prosperity of a state or society was at stake, leaders sometimes had to act in ways that were uncomfortable, unpopular, or even immoral. In these cases, the justification for such actions rested on the greater good that would come from achieving the end goal. This is where Machiavelli's thinking becomes more nuanced than the typical interpretation of his ideas. He did not suggest that the ends always justify any means, only that in critical situations, where the outcome has far-reaching consequences, leaders must be willing to make tough decisions and use whatever tools are necessary to achieve success. This principle applies not only to political leaders, but also to anyone in a position of power who is faced with difficult choices that could have significant long-term effects. Take, for example, the story of Winston Churchill during World War II. Churchill's leadership during the war is often lauded for his unwavering determination and his ability to inspire the British people to fight on despite overwhelming odds. However, his actions were not always aligned with the ethical standards that many would expect from a leader. One of the most striking examples of this is Churchill's decision to authorize the bombing of German cities, including civilian targets, in an attempt to break the morale of the enemy. These bombings caused immense suffering for civilians and led to significant loss of life. From an ethical standpoint, this could be seen as a violation of the principles of just warfare. However, Churchill justified these actions by the necessity of defeating Nazi Germany and ensuring the survival of the British nation. The end-goal victory over Nazi forces and the preservation of democracy was so critical that the methods used to achieve it were considered acceptable, even if they involved actions that many might consider immoral under normal circumstances. The same kind of strategic thinking can be applied in business. In the cutthroat world of corporate competition, leaders are often forced to make difficult decisions that can involve bending or breaking rules. For example, a company facing imminent financial collapse might choose to engage in aggressive cost-cutting measures, laying off large numbers of employees or cutting corners in product development in order to survive. While these actions may seem morally questionable, the end goal of saving the company and protecting the jobs of those who remain might justify these hard choices. The key, according to Machiavelli, is that the decision should be made with a clear understanding of the long-term consequences, and it should be driven by the necessity of preserving the organization's core objectives. It's important to note that Machiavelli's concept of the ends justifying the means is not a free pass for individuals to act solely in their own interest. The principle works only when the actions taken are in service of a greater good, whether that's the preservation of a nation, the survival of an organization, or the protection of a vital cause. This is where the distinction between Machiavelli's strategic thinking and mere selfishness becomes clear. Machiavelli was not suggesting that anyone should engage in unethical behavior simply for personal gain, but rather that leaders must be willing to make hard choices and take actions that might be uncomfortable or morally ambiguous when the stakes are high. One modern example that illustrates this concept can be found in the world of sports. Coaches and team owners often make decisions that prioritize winning over fairness. A coach might make the controversial decision to bench a star player who is key to the team's success, but who has demonstrated poor behavior off the field. While this might seem like an unfair punishment to the individual player, the coach's primary goal is to maintain the integrity of the team and secure the best chance of success in the long run. The decision may be unpopular with the player and possibly the fans, but the coach sees it as necessary to protect the greater good of the team and its ability to perform at the highest level. Another example can be found in the business world, particularly in the context of mergers and acquisitions. Companies that merge or acquire other companies often engage in aggressive tactics to secure favorable terms, such as misleading shareholders or using legal loopholes to gain an advantage. While these actions may seem unethical or underhanded, they're often justified by the end goal, creating a stronger, more competitive company that can provide better value for shareholders, employees, and customers. In these situations, the company's leadership may justify the means by focusing on the long-term benefits, even if it means taking actions that would be considered unethical in other contexts. Machiavelli's principle also plays a role in personal decision-making. In life, there are moments when individuals must make decisions that go against conventional morality to achieve a significant personal goal. For instance, a person may choose to accept a job offer that takes them away from their family or community in order to secure a better future for themselves and their loved ones. While the decision may be difficult and cause personal sacrifices, the individual's long-term goals may justify these temporary sacrifices. Ultimately, Machiavelli's view on the ends justifying the means serves as a reminder that leadership is about achieving tangible results, especially when the future of a nation, organization, or cause is at stake. While this philosophy does not condone unchecked manipulation or unethical behavior for personal gain, it encourages leaders to be pragmatic and to use all available tools to achieve success when the stakes are high. It emphasizes the importance of strategic thinking, the recognition of when extraordinary actions are necessary, and the willingness to make difficult decisions that might be unpopular but are essential for the greater good. Machiavelli's thoughts on reputation and perception highlight one of his most crucial and often misunderstood insights. Reputation is essential for power, but it doesn't necessarily require complete transparency. According to Machiavelli, a leader's reputation is shaped not by their methods or their internal workings, but by the consistency between what they say and what they do. It's a powerful concept, one that applies not only to political leaders, but to business figures, influencers, and anyone else in a position of power. In today's fast-paced, information-driven world, managing reputation and perception is often just as important, if not more so, than the actual substance behind actions or decisions. Machiavelli understood human nature deeply. He knew that people judge others based on appearances, behaviors, and results, but rarely, if ever, on the full picture of what occurs behind the scenes. This insight speaks to the fundamental difference between reality and how we perceive it. While the truth of a situation may be complex and multi-layered, what people remember and act upon is often a simplified version, a narrative that aligns with their own expectations or desires. For Machiavelli, this realization is key to achieving and maintaining power. It's not about crafting a false image for deception's sake, but about recognizing that perception, more than reality, often drives people's actions and judgments. The importance of managing perception cannot be overstated, especially for public figures. Take Henry Kissinger, the former U.S. Secretary of State. As a prime example, Kissinger was an expert at managing both his reputation and the perception of his actions, even in the midst of controversial decisions. His back-channel diplomacy with China in the 1970s is a case in point. On the surface, he presented himself as a peacemaker and a diplomat working toward global stability. In reality, however, his actions behind closed doors were often less about idealism and more about securing U.S. strategic interests during the Cold War. Kissinger's ability to control the narrative around his actions made him a highly effective political figure. While his methods were sometimes morally ambiguous, his ability to shape how the public, the media, and even his opponents viewed his actions was crucial to his success. It wasn't that Kissinger was more virtuous or ethical than other leaders. Rather, he understood that how people perceive his intentions, decisions, and results could matter more than the substance of those actions. Through this strategic manipulation of perception, he was able to secure his place in history, even as his methods often remained controversial. In the same vein, public figures and business leaders today still understand the importance of managing perception, particularly when it comes to brand identity. A brand's reputation is built on the story it tells, the narrative it creates, and the image it projects, not necessarily on the full details of its operations. Apple, for example, is a master of perception management. The company is known for its minimalist, sleek product designs, and its advertisements often emphasize the emotional connection customers have with its products rather than the technical specifics of how those products are made. Apple doesn't focus on the complexity of its manufacturing processes, the environmental concerns related to the production of its devices, or the controversies surrounding the labor practices of some of its suppliers. Instead, Apple focuses on creating a brand narrative centered around simplicity, innovation, and a sense of empowerment. By carefully controlling the information that reaches the public, Apple has been able to craft a powerful and enduring reputation. The company's products are seen as desirable, premium, and high quality because of the narrative that has been built around them. This perception is so strong that millions of people are willing to pay a premium for Apple products. Not just because of the technical specifications, but because of the emotional appeal tied to the brand. Apple's reputation is not built on the full transparency of its operations, but rather on its ability to manage how people perceive the product. This idea of perception over reality extends far beyond just business or political figures. It applies to social dynamics and interpersonal relationships as well. People naturally tend to judge others based on the image they project, whether it's in their physical appearance, their online persona, or their outward behavior in social settings. A person who exudes confidence and authority is often perceived as capable and competent, even if they're struggling internally with insecurity or self-doubt. In contrast, someone who is open about their struggles may be perceived as weak or unreliable, even if their competence is beyond question. Consider the world of job interviews, for example. Candidates are often judged not only on their qualifications, but on how they present themselves during the interview. A candidate who speaks confidently, dresses appropriately, and is able to clearly articulate their strengths and weaknesses is more likely to be hired than someone who is timid, unsure of themselves, or unable to communicate effectively. The interview is a performance, one that's based on the perception the interviewer has of the candidate, rather than a full understanding of their capabilities or experience. The fact that people judge others based on perception, rather than the complete reality, is why Machiavelli emphasized the importance of cultivating a reputation. He didn't suggest that leaders should be dishonest about their intentions or actions. Rather, he acknowledged that leaders must be aware of how they are perceived by others and take strategic steps to ensure that their reputation aligns with their goals. Reputation is a tool, and when used effectively, it can open doors, create opportunities, and solidify one's power. This brings us to the critical concept that reputation is built on the consistency between what you say and what you do. It's not enough to say the right things. Leaders must also deliver results that match their words. If a leader consistently acts in a way that aligns with their public statements, they will gain credibility and trust, which can ultimately be leveraged to gain power. However, the key to maintaining a positive reputation is not necessarily transparency, but ensuring that the results align with expectations. If a politician promises to tackle healthcare reform and then delivers a comprehensive plan, their reputation for competence will be enhanced. Conversely, if they make a similar promise and fail to deliver, their reputation will suffer, regardless of their intentions or the challenges they faced. Machiavelli understood that a leader's reputation is ultimately determined by the results they produce. This focus on outcomes rather than methods or transparency highlights one of the most pragmatic aspects of his philosophy. While transparency might be valued in some circles, it does not necessarily guarantee success. If a leader is too transparent, they risk exposing their weaknesses, opening themselves up to attack, or losing control over the narrative. Instead, Machiavelli suggested that a successful leader must be able to manage the narrative carefully and ensure that their actions align with the expectations they've set for themselves. The leader's reputation will be built on the outcomes they achieve and the story they tell, not necessarily on the methods they use to reach their goals. In practical terms, managing perception means controlling the flow of information, carefully crafting messages, and strategically deciding what to reveal and when. This is evident in the world of politics, where campaigns are built around carefully crafted narratives. Politicians who manage to project an image of strength, empathy, or leadership often find greater success than those who focus on presenting their flaws or struggles in the hopes of appearing more authentic. The ability to manage perception allows leaders to shape the narrative and direct public opinion, which can be a powerful tool in achieving success. This is particularly relevant in the age of social media, where information is disseminated rapidly and reputation can be made or destroyed in an instant. Social media influencers, for example, have mastered the art of managing their online persona. They carefully curate their posts to highlight their achievements, their lifestyle, and their emotional connections with their followers, while concealing their struggles, challenges, or failures. The image they present to their followers is one of perfection, success, and happiness. And it is this image that drives their popularity and influence. In the business world, companies also recognize the power of managing perception. A brand's reputation is often more valuable than the product itself. Think of luxury brands like Rolex or Louis Vuitton. These companies invest heavily in crafting an image of exclusivity and high quality, and their success is built on the perception that owning one of their products is a symbol of prestige. The reality behind the product, the manufacturing process, the materials used, or the cost to produce it may not be as glamorous as the image presented to the consumer. But the perception of luxury and status is what drives demand. Machiavelli's understanding of reputation and perception offer the lens through which we can better understand the dynamics of power. Reputation, when carefully managed, is an essential tool for gaining and maintaining power. And the ability to shape how others perceive you can often be more important than the reality of your actions. The key is consistency between what you say and what you do, between the narrative you craft and the results you deliver. By controlling your reputation and perception, you can influence how others view you and, ultimately, secure your place in power. Machiavelli's final lesson in his work, The Prince, introduces one of the most paradoxical and profound aspects of his philosophy. That power itself is neither inherently good nor evil. It is merely a tool. This tool, when used effectively and strategically, can yield results that benefit not just the individual in power, but also society at large. Machiavelli, often misunderstood as advocating for pure self-interest and deception, actually offers a much more nuanced view. His argument centers around the idea that power is neutral, and how it is applied determines its moral weight. For Machiavelli, achieving meaningful and valuable outcomes sometimes requires bending or even breaking conventional moral rules, including the strategic use of deception. In this context, deception becomes a tool not for selfish gain, but as a means of achieving goals that serve the greater good. The concept of Machiavellianism has been historically painted in a negative light, often associated with manipulation, deceit, and ruthlessness. However, this interpretation overlooks the deeper layers of Machiavelli's thought, which emphasize the need for leaders to act pragmatically and strategically to navigate complex, high-stakes situations. Far from advocating deceit as an end in itself, Machiavelli recognized that there are times when transparency and absolute honesty can actually be detrimental to achieving the greater good. It is this tension, the paradox of deception, serving a noble cause, that lies at the heart of his political philosophy. To understand this paradox, it's important to look at how Machiavelli applies the idea of strategic opacity. By strategic opacity, he means that there are moments when it is better to keep certain truths hidden, not because you wish to deceive for personal gain, but because the situation requires it. Sometimes, revealing the full truth can hinder progress, destabilize systems, or create chaos. On the other hand, when the outcome is essential for the greater good, withholding certain information or using selective transparency can help protect the broader objective. Consider the example of Winston Churchill during World War II. Churchill, one of the most renowned leaders in modern history, was faced with a nation at war, a time when difficult decisions were required for survival. One of the most famous moments in his leadership came when he addressed the British people during the early days of the war. Instead of sugarcoating the dire situation, he presented them with the harsh reality. "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." His message was brutally honest, but it was also strategic. Churchill knew that the survival of Britain was not guaranteed, and the British people needed to face the truth in order to rally behind the effort. This is an example of transparent leadership in the face of adversity. Yet, at the same time, Churchill also understood that some information had to be withheld, particularly regarding military operations and intelligence, to protect national security and prevent panic. The point here is not that Churchill was always transparent, but rather that he understood when and where transparency would be beneficial and when opacity was necessary. If Churchill had been fully transparent about every strategic decision, revealing every weakness and vulnerability, it could have undermined morale or emboldened the enemy. Instead, by strategically managing the flow of information, he was able to maintain control, inspire confidence, and ultimately steer Britain through one of the most dangerous periods in its history. Machiavelli's teachings encourage leaders to think strategically about the use of power and the application of deception. The key is to recognize when and how deception can be used to achieve positive, long-term outcomes. For instance, in business, CEOs and executives often face situations where making certain information public too early can have negative consequences, whether it's a new product launch or a merger deal. By withholding certain details, they can protect the interests of their company, manage market reactions, and control the narrative to ensure that the final outcome is successful. While this may not be entirely transparent, it could be a strategic choice that ultimately serves the best interests of the company and its stakeholders. Take the example of Apple and the launch of the iPhone. When Apple was preparing to release the first iPhone, it kept many of the product's features a secret until the official launch event. This secrecy created a sense of anticipation and excitement, allowing the company to control how the product was introduced to the world. Had Apple revealed all of the iPhone's features and specifications before the product launch, it might not have had the same impact. The strategic withholding of information, what we might call strategic opacity, was key to creating a sense of mystique and demand around the product. Apple's ability to manage perception and control the narrative around its product launches is a testament to how Machiavelli's concept of strategic opacity can be used effectively for business success. The same principle applies in leadership and governance. In times of crisis, leaders often have to make decisions that are unpopular or even morally questionable in order to protect their nation or society. For example, during the Cold War, many political leaders engaged in covert operations, intelligence gathering, and diplomatic efforts that were not transparent to the public, all in the interest of national security. While these actions might have been seen as morally ambiguous, they were justified by the necessity of protecting a greater good, the preservation of peace and stability in the world. One of the most controversial examples of this concept is the use of surveillance and intelligence gathering in the modern age. In the post-9/11 world, governments around the globe, particularly in the United States, have engaged in extensive surveillance programs designed to prevent terrorist attacks. These programs, which often operate in secrecy and without public knowledge, have been justified by the need to protect national security. Critics argue that such actions infringe upon personal freedoms and violate the principles of transparency and privacy. However, proponents of these programs would argue that, given the high stakes of terrorism, the need for secrecy and strategic deception is justified by the greater good of keeping citizens safe. Machiavelli's teachings suggest that there is a time for brutal honesty, as Churchill demonstrated. But there is also a time when withholding information or engaging in strategic deception is necessary to achieve a greater objective. Leaders must learn to navigate this balance carefully, recognizing when to reveal the truth and when to conceal it in order to protect the interests of their people or organization. The Machiavellian Paradox teaches that the strategic use of deception is not about undermining ethical principles, but rather about recognizing that in certain circumstances, the greater good requires actions that might appear morally ambiguous in the short term. Machiavelli did not advocate for dishonesty for the sake of personal gain. Instead, he advocated for leaders to be pragmatic and strategic, using deception as a tool when necessary to ensure the success of their endeavors. This strategic use of deception is especially important in situations where there is no clear path to success or when the stakes are so high that failure would result in catastrophic consequences. In these situations, leaders must be willing to make difficult decisions that may not be popular or morally easy, but are necessary for achieving their long-term goals. It is through this willingness to think strategically about the use of power that Machiavelli's teachings remain relevant in today's world. Consider the story of Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. Lincoln faced one of the greatest crises in American history, and his decision to suspend habeas corpus, while controversial, was a necessary step in ensuring the survival of the Union. Lincoln understood that, in this extraordinary situation, strict adherence to the law and the Constitution could potentially lead to the destruction of the nation. He chose to take the necessary steps, even if they were controversial, in order to achieve the ultimate goal of preserving the Union. This is a prime example of Machiavelli's concept in action, using strategic opacity or even stepping outside of traditional ethical boundaries to achieve a larger, more important objective. Ultimately, the Machiavellian Paradox challenges us to rethink our understanding of ethics, power, and leadership. Machiavelli's teachings are not a call to abandon moral principles altogether, but rather a call to think critically about when and how those principles should be applied. Power is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for both good and ill. When used strategically, it can achieve outcomes that benefit not only the individual but society as a whole. Leaders must be able to recognize when deception is necessary and when it is not, and they must be willing to make hard decisions in order to achieve the greater good. This is the essence of Machiavellian thinking, recognizing the complexities of human nature and using power effectively to achieve meaningful, long-term outcomes. Wow, what a journey through the mind of Machiavelli, right? His ideas might feel uncomfortable or even contradictory, but as we've learned, there's a deeper logic to his approach, a logic that has shaped leaders for centuries. The Machiavellian paradox is clear. Power isn't inherently good or evil. It's all about how it's used. If used with strategy and for the right purposes, it becomes a powerful tool for not just personal gain, but for the greater good. You can see it in every successful figure. From Julius Caesar's careful cultivation of public perception to the strategic opacity of companies like Apple. It's about controlling the narrative, managing reputation, and knowing when to push for results no matter what it takes. The lesson here? Don't shy away from using strategic thinking and, when necessary, strategic deception to achieve your goals. The world may not always reward honesty, but it always rewards results. Now, if you found value in this deep dive into Machiavelli's teachings, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up. It helps so much in getting this video out to others who could benefit from this knowledge. Share it with anyone you think would appreciate a new perspective on leadership and success. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. There's so much more we're going to explore on this channel, and I can't wait to have you all along for the ride. And of course, if you've been moved by the content and want to show your appreciation, feel free to hit that super thanks button. Your support helps us continue creating these insightful and thought-provoking videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, remember, in the pursuit of power, the end always justifies the means if you know how to use them wisely.